here, but I want to draw special attention to a couple people. Brenda Ressam back after 3 weeks after having a hip replacement surgery, and we are glad, or was it knee? Knee replacement. All right. I knew it was one of those parts, but we're glad you're here. Thank God for that. And Lydia, where's Lydia? Lydia Van Winkle, first Sunday back after a deployment in Afghanistan. We are so glad that God brought you back to us. Safe and sound. All right. If you are hungry for some hope today, and you could use a little bit of that, would you say amen? Amen. All right. I got good news for you because there's going to be plenty of that this morning. John chapter 2, Jesus and his disciples were invited to a wedding. Good idea to invite Jesus to your wedding, not just to the wedding, but to the marriage, right? I think David and Nancy did that or we wouldn't have 46 years going on down here. So that's awesome. Weddings back in that day were not like weddings today. We've got like a short ceremony and then a reception of some sort that may involve a pretty big meal or may not. Weddings back in Jesus' day, first century, was a week-long affair. Now, I know we got a few families, you guys right back there planning a marriage for this summer or wedding for this summer, and the cooks are doing the same thing for their daughter. That's a lot of money, right? Even like that short ceremony, one meal for everybody, it's like, got to take a loan out for that. Can you imagine having to pay for a week-long celebration for the food and the entertainment for everybody that shows up at the wedding? That's how it was in the first century. So Jesus' disciples, they show up at this wedding, and at some point in the middle of all that, they have a problem. Jesus' mother, who is both perceptive and incredibly persistent, comes to Jesus with this problem, and she gets straight to the point. Jesus, there is no more wine. This is not like, hey, we're starting to run a little bit low here, and so could you tell the disciples to slack up a little bit on? It's not, we're getting near the end, I'm not sure. It's gone. There is no more. It's dry. We're wiped out. There is no more wine. As if this problem for this wedding party is supposed to be Jesus' problem. And his initial answer to his mother is, that's not my monkey, so don't be putting it on my back. The timing is not right here. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm just here for the celebration. And his mother, it cracks me up. I mean, she is a mother. It reminds me, because what she does here is literally act as if Jesus has not said that at all. And she says to the servants, do what he tells you. It reminds me of what happens at my house all the time. Sometimes when we're having dinner, instead of putting everything from the stove into a bowl or whatever, in order to save on the dishes, Michelle might just bring the pan of whatever straight to the table and just put it on the plate. Y'all ever do that? And my kids will be sitting there saying, no, thank you, I guess I'll have some now. That is what Jesus' mother does here. Jesus, there is a problem. We are out of wine. I'm not sure it's not. Do what he tells you. So Jesus says to the servants, go fill up the 6 stone water jars. They were big. They held 20 to 30 gallons apiece. Go fill them up with water. Now, we know from that context, this was a Jewish wedding. Those 6 stone water jars were set apart for ceremonial cleansing so that all the guests that had come for this sacred covenant ceremony could wash their hands. And we know that it was more significant than just, you're going to be eating together, so make sure your hands are clean. It didn't just have a sanitary import. It was significant to their religion. So literally, those 6 stone water jars were provided so that everyone who was coming in for this sacred covenant ceremony could literally come clean. Jesus says to the servants, fill them up. Now, at this stage in the game, I'm curious about how these servants respond to Jesus' order. Because immediately, they just do what he tells them to do. And Eric, at this point, these servants could have said, you're not the boss of me. Now, we may be servants, but we're not your servant. It's the master of the house here is the one that we answer to. You want those water jars filled up? You do it yourself, buddy. But that's not what they say at all. And I'm really intrigued by that. That when Jesus shows up and the problem of the party becomes his problem, he gives an order to some servants, and their very first reaction to Jesus is, okay, I'll do what you tell me to do. And they, for us and for centuries, have provided like this great example of really what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Because all of us, it says in Romans 6, Paul says, we go from being slaves to sin, servants to sin, to being slaves of righteousness, where we willingly offer our obedience to a new master, right? So here these guys are, a perfect example that when Jesus shows up and starts giving orders and directives, that what a true disciple of Jesus does is very simple. We do what he says. And that's how you can always tell who a follower of Jesus is and who a poser is. Because a poser shows up for the ceremony, but when it comes time for doing what Jesus says to do, well, I'm not so sure about, you're not the boss of me. And honestly, this is probably not true of you, but it may be true of somebody sitting in front of you or behind you. There are people that come to the ceremony on Sunday and show all week long that they're not really a disciple, because when Jesus starts saying do this and do that and don't do this and don't do that, our actions say, you're not the boss of me. Come on. But in this story, these servants, and I love them, as soon as Jesus gives the order, they're like, okay, let's go fill it up. So they fill up these 6 stone water jars, 20 to 30 gallons. And if Joe Voigt's math is right, it's about equal to the amount of water that's up here this morning. That much water. As soon as those jars are filled up, Jesus says to one of these servants, all right, take some of this to the master of ceremonies. So we don't know if they used a bottle, an empty jug, whatever, a ladle. Somehow they get it to the master of ceremonies. And somewhere between fill up the water jars and this, a transformation takes place. And that ceremonial water of purification becomes celebratory wine of celebration. And the guy he's like amazed, because it's not just wine, it is good wine. So good that the quality of this thing is unbelievable. Everybody else, they bring the good stuff first, and after people are like, then they bring out the junk, right? He says what's happening in this party is radically different from that. And so Jesus diverts a disaster by turning water into wine. Can you imagine what Mary's response must have been? Go, Jesus! That's what I'm talking about. You said it wasn't your time. I knew it was your time. And it's amazing how many good things happen when Jesus is in the neighborhood. Mary is a great example of bringing the problem to Jesus. And we look at Mary and say, thank you for your example, because there's a lot of times I don't do that. I got this problem, and I take it everywhere but Jesus. Anybody else ever? The first thing she did, we got this problem, let's bring it to him. And then we got servants that show obedience, water turned into wine, transformation that happens. It's a great story. We find it in John chapter 2, and I don't want you to just take my word for it. We're going to read it. So once you find in your scriptures John chapter 2, I'll invite you to stand if you're able to do so, and we will read this account of Jesus' first miracle. Hear the word of the Lord. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, fill the jars with water. They filled them up to the brim. He said to them, now draw some out and take it to the chief steward. So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the servant called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now. Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples, whom he had just called in the previous chapters, believed in him. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. One of the things that this story shows us, which is like, boom, this is amazing, is that anytime Jesus is in the neighborhood, transformation is possible. The impossible becomes possible when we bring our problems, the problems of other people, to the one who can make a difference. When Jesus is in the neighborhood, you can bank on it that whatever, however bad, horrible, hopeless the situation may appear to be, when Jesus is around, transformation is always a possibility. If. But what this first sign, there's 7 signs in John miracles. And what does a sign do? It points people in a direction, right? As John's gospel unfolds, these signs are intended to do one thing. Point people to the fact that Jesus is who he said he was, the Son of God. In fact, John gets to the end of his gospel and he says, these things were, if I were to write everything that Jesus did, it would we wouldn't have enough books in all the world. But these things were written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. And by believing, have life in his name. So at the very first miracle, that's exactly what happens. The disciples come to believe in Jesus. So this really does set the tone for what will happen throughout Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of John. John chapter 4. I'm going to tell you 2 or 3 more stories. You like stories? You very good for that? Even if you don't, I'm going to tell them anyway because that's what God told me to say. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So John chapter 4, Jesus and his disciples are on a journey. They're all the time going somewhere because he's got to proclaim the kingdom, that the good news that the kingdom has come everywhere he goes. So they're on this journey and they find themselves in Samaria. Now, just a brief little aside on Samaria. Samaritans and Jews got along about as good as cats and dogs. They mixed about as well as oil and water. They did not like each other. In fact, lots of times when Jews had to get from point A to point B and Samaria was between them, they did not take the direct route. They went around it just to avoid these people. Jesus was like, shortest distance between 2 points is, we're going through. So they're going through Samaria. They are nearing the city of Sychar. And Jesus says to his disciples when they arrive at a well, y'all go on in and get lunch. I'm going to just hang out here. So Jesus stops at the well. The disciples go into the city. And it isn't very long before a woman comes to the well. Many of you are familiar with this story, but it's a great story. The woman comes because she wants to go to the well in the middle of the afternoon for one reason. Nobody else is going to be there. She wants to go in the middle of the afternoon when nobody's going to be there because she's got a horrible reputation. She has a sordid past. And it seems like everywhere she goes, all people want to do is remind her of all the stuff that she's done that have turned her into not a very good person. So rather than be reminded that she's not a very good person by all these people who just want to point to her past, she goes at a time where she doesn't have to deal with that. Only today, it's a lot different because, whoa, there's somebody there. So she goes in expecting to get a drink of water because she's hot and tired and thirsty and it's the middle of the day. And Jesus strikes up a conversation with a sinful Samaritan woman. Do you remember that Jews and Samaritans don't get along? They don't talk to each other. They stay away. But Jesus is always busting up barriers that we tend to put up between us and other people. Amen. So he engages her in conversation. And you know what they talk about? They talk about water. They talk about well water and they talk about living water. They talk about worship. And they talk about this woman's sordid past because it isn't very long before Jesus goes where everybody else has gone, but with a totally different motive because he's not there to remind her how bad she has been. He's there to remind her how good she can be if she takes a drink of this water that she's never had before. So in the course of that conversation, she experiences forgiveness instead of condemnation. And it lightens her step and it transforms her. Literally, she goes back into the town and she starts telling all the people that she didn't want to see and she didn't want to talk to before, you got to come out here and see this guy. He knew everything there was to know about me and he loved me anyway. He forgave me. I'm telling you, you need to meet him too. So this sinful woman in one encounter with Jesus is transformed from a sinful woman into an effective evangelist. All the people from the town come out. And it's always, I think this is kind of funny. The disciples go into town, these followers of Jesus. You know who they bring back? Bread. The sinful woman goes back into town. You know who she brings back to Jesus? Everybody. So she brings them all back and they come to faith in this same Jesus. The Jesus who shows up and transforms water into wine and transforms sinful women into effective evangelists. I'm telling you this morning that when Jesus is in the neighborhood, impossibilities become possible. And hopeless situations become filled with hope. If you came hungry for some hope this morning, I've got good news for you because I believe that the same Jesus who turned water into wine and transformed a sinful woman into an effective evangelist is the same Jesus who's in the neighborhood today. And anytime Jesus is in the neighborhood, transformation is possible. If The very next chapter finds Jesus at this place called the Pool of Bethesda. It was a strange place, but it was a place where sick people gathered because every so often the waters of the pool would be stirred up. And I don't know how it worked, but it worked. That the first person that got into the water sick got out of the water well. There was a man there laying there. He had been there for 38 years, a paralyzed guy. He had known nothing but an immobile, hopeless, difficult entirety of his 38. Can you imagine 38 years of paralysis and seeing the water stirred and not having the ability to get there, and time after time seeing somebody else get in sick, get out well, and there you sit, unable to do anything about it. It was a Sabbath day when Jesus came by. And Jesus engaged the paralytic in conversation. Maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons that God stirred up your spirit to be here today is because he wants to engage in a conversation with you. Engages them in conversation, and he says, you know what? How long have you been here? I've been here a long time. How long have you been paralyzed? 38 years. And Jesus is like, well, why don't we just put an end to that today? Today, good a day as any, right? Don't wait for that pool to stir up. Take up your mat, get up and walk. And instantly, the guy does what Jesus tells him to do. That's a good combination, right? Jesus said something, we do what he says, good things happen. He picks up his mat, he starts to walk, and in that moment, a transformation happens from a hopeless paralytic into a healthy man. And he goes forth praising God. It's an amazing story. And we're reminded that in the story of Jesus, everywhere he shows up, when Jesus is in the neighborhood, transformation happens. This is the same guy, turns water into wine, turns a sinful woman into an effective evangelist, turns a paralyzed man into a healthy man. That's what happens when Jesus shows up. And what I believe today, the same Jesus did that. He's here. He hasn't changed. He's present. He's among us. And every time Jesus is around, transformation is possible. One more, John chapter 9, we fast forward. He's in Jerusalem. He's at the temple, and his disciples, this is kind of crazy. Unlike Mary, who brings a problem to Jesus because she wants it to be fixed, the disciples bring a problem to Jesus just because they're curious. They bring a problem called a blind man, blind from birth, to Jesus because they're curious. Hey, Jesus, psst. So tell us, who sinned? Was it this guy who's blind? Or was it his parents? Was it his grandparents? Somebody brought this about. Who did it? And tell us, what did they do? Schmucks. Followers of Jesus seeing an opportunity to have their curiosity satisfied when Jesus sees an opportunity to do the miraculous. You know, disciples are disciples. And we, as followers of Jesus, if you already are one, we can bring people to Jesus because we want him to do the miraculous, or we can bring people to Jesus to satisfy our sick curiosities about how they got in the mess they're in. It's in there. So Jesus says, well, here's the deal. It's not this guy's sin. It's not his parents' sin. He was born this way because there was going to be an opportunity for God to be glorified in this. So here's what we're going to do. And Jesus, this unconventional, he's unpredictable, right? But what he does here, he makes a mud pie. And he puts it on the guy's eyes and tells him, go to the pool of Siloam, wash all that stuff off. And this guy who's never met Jesus before, you know what he does? He does what Jesus tells him to do. So he goes to the pool of Siloam, washes his eyes, boom, he can see. And in one encounter with Jesus, he goes from being blind to being able to see. And it's really amazing because in this context of John chapter 9, where there's all multiple levels of things going on here, because we got people that can see who can't really see, and people who can't see who really can see. Because while this guy is blind, he has the foresight and the vision to know that if you do what Jesus says, it's a pretty good thing. Meanwhile, there are Pharisees and teachers of the law and other people that are in the synagogue that day who can see just as good as you and I can, but they can't see a thing. because they do not have the spiritual foresight to see anything in Jesus other than a guy who's maybe just a little interesting, but not somebody that's worth following. And all of a sudden, a blind man is transformed into a visionary. And the same God, the same Jesus who turned water into wine and a sinful woman into an effective evangelist and a paralyzed man into a healthy person, transforms this blind man into a visionary. Can I tell you that when Jesus is in the neighborhood, you never know what's going to happen? The most difficult hardship, been this way my whole life, can be radically rearranged when the Messiah is in the neighborhood. Do you know what I believe it like all the way down. You know what I believe today? That the same Jesus who turned water into wine can turn doubt into faith. Can turn fear into confidence. Can turn self-reliance into God-reliance. I believe that the same Jesus who transformed a sinful woman into an effective evangelist can do the same thing with anybody on the planet, no matter how many times they've sinned, I believe he can do that for people that are in church on Sunday morning who've been sinning on Saturday night. I believe that. I believe that the same Jesus who transformed a sinful woman into an effective evangelist can do that for anybody in this house or anyone like it this morning, I believe that the same Jesus who healed a paralyzed man who had no hope can take a hopeless paralytic. I believe that Jesus who did that can take a hopeless person today and transform them into a holy character. Because that's what Jesus does. In all of our brokenness, in all of our sickness, in all of our paralysis, be that spiritual, in all of our blindness, when Jesus shows up, he does it. We sing about that when we sing Amazing Grace, right? I once was blind, but... Really? That's my story. I once was blind. In fact, if you've been turning a blind eye to God your whole life, he can give you vision today to see that this Jesus that we crazy people come and sing about and serve all day long is the same Savior who can show up and do transformation in the life that's called you today. If we are willing to admit that we have no wine. If we are willing to admit that we can't take care of our own sin. You know, you never find the soul thirst satisfied until you're willing to recognize that you can't satisfy it on your own. I believe that the same Jesus that we've been reading about, hearing about in John's gospel, can do the same thing for people today if we do what he says. If we go from serving other stuff to serving him, he can work. You know what? I just love this, man. I think it's great. I think it's hope-filled. It's great news because that's my God that we're talking about here in this story, right? All these stories. That if your wine has run out, see, here's what's possible. And honestly, here's what I think happens sometimes on Sunday morning. People come to the ceremony, but they're not part of the celebration because sometime back there, the wine ran out. And we're present, but there's no celebration going on in our spirit. There's no livelihood. There's no, whoo! Jesus is awesome. I talked to him this morning. He's great. I used to have I kind of knew him better back then. When Jesus is in the neighborhood, transformation is always possible. If we will humble ourselves to the point where we say, I need that from him. We get to the end of the story of the life of Jesus, and there's a scene where there's more transformation that's going on. It's a Passover scene where they're celebrating God's deliverance of the people of Israel when he brought them out of bondage. It's something that they celebrated every single year. And Jesus transforms that meal of remembrance into a means of grace that we call a sacrament. When he took bread with his disciples and broke it and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And after supper, in the same way, he took the cup, wine. And I wonder if just for a fleeting moment, Jesus didn't go back to Cana. But he held the wine up and said, "This represents my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of your sins." And all of a sudden, a meal of remembrance becomes a means of grace. And it's a meal that ever since, people like us in places like this have believed that every time the people of God break bread together, Jesus is in the neighborhood. Which is really cool. It's great news. You know why? Because anytime Jesus is in the neighborhood, transformation is possible. He turned water into wine, and a whole lot of it. Our stance on alcohol is we abstain. That's why we got water up here instead of wine. I'd like to give you all a bottle, but we don't do that. But in a minute, we're going to come to the table, and what you're going to find, I might have to open this one here. I think the rest of them are open. Down on the floor beside them are cases of water. And you don't have to do this. And you may say, "Pastor Steve, that's really corny." Well, maybe it is, but you can live with me anyway. If you have experienced the transforming power and grace of Jesus in your life, then when you come to receive these sacred symbols, grab one. And set it somewhere till you get thirsty enough to drink it. Where maybe at least for this week, you'll see it. And it'll be a reminder that we serve a Savior who transforms water into wine. Who takes the stuff of ceremonial purification and turns it into celebration. And be thankful. Every time you see it, say, "Thank you, Jesus. You did that in me. Thank you." Or maybe this morning, really where you find yourself is, all I got's water. Because the wine ran out a long time ago. And what you need is for the presence of Jesus to do something new in your life. To reignite the fire, to light up the passion, maybe to forgive some sin that you know is what's gotten between you and God. Then I want some of you all too, really, if that's you, then I want you to grab one too. We got plenty of them. You can see up, there's a lot. And maybe after you do that, you would want to just kneel at an altar like this one and say, "All right, God, this is all I got. And if it's ever going to be any more than that, you're going to have to do something more in me." Today would be a really cool day for that to happen, don't you think? So in a second, I'm going to have our servers come forward, but you kind of get what we're doing, right? Father, I want to say thank you. Because you're a great Father, and you